So we are on DAF, the very bottom of Ayin Hayom and Beis on the bottom line. There's a machlokes in our Mishnah regarding a case where you have two animals, two sheep. One was set aside for a korban asham, and the other one was set aside for a korban shlamim. And so Reb Shimon says, well, basically you have a solution, and what you can do is you can just treat both of them with the chumras of both a shlamim and an asham, which means as far as the expiration date, since an asham can only be eaten on that day through the night and not the following day, even though a shlamim can be eaten the following day, we would limit you to doing that. So the chachamim say no, we disagree, and because they say ein mevi'in kadshim lebeis hapsul, we don't allow you to create a situation where you're unnecessarily causing something which is kadshim to be inedible prematurely, to expire prematurely. And therefore, we don't allow you to do that, but rather what they say, here's what we advocate. You should let both animals graze, develop a mum, and then, in this situation, you are poda the animals onto coinage and purchase two new animals, one for a definitive asham and one for a definitive shlamim. The Gemara then says, the Gemara has a discussion, and the surmisal of that discussion, according to Rava, is that even Reb Shimon does not permit to be mevi kodshim lebeis hapsul lechatchila. Doesn't allow you to gratuitously take something that's kodshim and cause it to expire prematurely by mixing it in with something else, or transacting it with something else. But right, if you're dealing with a b'di'evet situation where the two animals already got mixed together, only in our situation would Reb Shimon permit you to be mevi kodshim lebeis hapsul. So ulechatchila lo. So that's the Gemara's question. You mean to tell me that lechatchila Reb Shimon would agree that ein mevi'in kodshim lebeis hapsul? Eisvei Abaye. So Abaye presents a challenge, and this is going to be later on in the Gemara. It's a Mishnah later on. V'kulan rishoyin kohanim l'shanos ba'achilasan la'achlan sluyin shlukim u'muvushalim v'laseis l'sochan tavle chulin v'tavle truma divrei Reb Shimon. That's the girsa change. Is that, according to Reb Shimon, when the kohanim take their meat that they're entitled to from the korban, you could have, let's say, you have a Wolfgang Puck Kohen. He's a chef, and he wants to prepare the meat from his korban in a very exotic fashion. So according to Reb Shimon, you can use whatever spices and whatever, what do they call that, sous vide? Is that the new method of cooking? You can cook it any way you want, in any fashion, and use any spice, including not only regular chulin spices, but you could use even truma spices. Now, the inherent problem with telling us that you can use truma spices is you're bringing kodshim lebeis hapsul. Why? Because truma has no expiration date. But by adding it to korban meat, which has an expiration date, you're gratuitously causing the truma to become inedible past a certain time. So, according to Reb Shimon, you're even allowed to do this lechatchila, so it's a kasha on Rava. So, Amar lei hanach litrumas tavlin derabanan. So Rava said, oh, come on. Spices are like herbs, coriander, parsley, rosemary, thyme. Those are only subject to truma midrabanan because they're plants, they're herbs. They're not actual fruit produce. And so therefore it's only derabanan. There Reb Shimon is more makel at even lechatchila you can bring kodshim lebeis hapsul. So eisvei. Okay, let me ask you from another. This is a Mishnah in Maseches Shvius about the laws of Shemitah. Ein lokchin truma. I'm sorry, it's a Mishnah Meiser Sheni. My mistake. About the laws of Meiser Sheni. Ein lokchin truma bekesef Meiser mipnei shemayit memayit b'achilasa v'Reb Shimon matir. The halacha is that when I bring coinage that has Meiser Sheni kedusha on it, I have to purchase food items to consume only in Yerushalayim, not anywhere else. And the Mishnah says that according to Reb Shimon, you're permitted to purchase even truma. If you're a Kohen, Rabbi Berman Shalom. If you're a Kohen, you're permitted to purchase even truma. Even truma is permitted to purchase. So the question is, how can you be permitted to purchase truma? Now, this is not a chronological mevi kodshim lebeis hapsul, but it's a spatial mevi kodshim lebeis apsul, because if you're confining the truma to be eaten only in Yerushalayim, so you have a problem. You're limiting the truma, just like, you shouldn't be allowed to limit the truma chronologically. You shouldn't be allowed to limit the truma spatially. If you're telling me that according to Reb Shimon, lechatchila ein mevi'in kodshim lebeis apsul. So that's another kasha. So ishtik lay. So Rava was silent. He did not have an answer. And therefore it seems from this is conclusive proof that according to Reb Shimon, not like Rava says, but according to Reb Shimon, even lechatchila, you're allowed to be mevi kodshim lebeis apsul. Now, ki asa lekami de Rav Yosef Amar le amaylo tosvei meha. So Abaya succeeded in sort of, winning the battle of ideas with Rava, and he comes to Rav Yosef and he relates to him what their discussion was. And Rav Yosef, his Rebbe, says, you could have asked him from another Mishnah. Here's the Mishnah. It says, Ein mevashlin, this is about Shemitah. Ein mevashlin yerek shel shvius b'shemen shel truma shelo yaviu kodshim lebeis apsul v'Reb Shimon matir. It says in the Mishnah in Masechah Shvius that if you have Shemitah produce, that is, let's say here the example is vegetables, and you want to cook it in oil, so the halacha is, according to the Tanakama, you're not allowed to, because the oil is truma, and you're being mevi kodshim lebeis apsul. Why? Because Shemitah has an expiration date. Shemitah produce can only be consumed as long as it is available, still growing in the wild. It's still ripe and growing in the wild. Once it's no longer available, it's out of season, you're no longer allowed to eat the Shemitah produce that's in your home. So you see from here that according to the Tanakama, you're not allowed to, but according to Reb Shimon, even lechatchila, you're permitted to do so. Once again, you see that according to Reb Shimon, to be mevi kodshim lebeis apsul is mutter even lechatchila. So Amar le Abaya v'lav mios vise mehad tavlin v'amar li hanach letrumas tavlin derabanan hachanami trumas yerek derabanan. So Abaya said, well, the reason why I didn't bother to ask him from that Mishnah is because it was a repeat of something that I had already asked him. I had challenged him from the Mishnah having to do with the Kohanim using spices from Truma, and he said, well, that's different because it's only derabanan. So here too, maybe since we're dealing with vegetables, it's only Truma derabanan, and that's why it's mutter lechatchila, but when it's Truma deoraisa, it wouldn't be mutter lechatchila. So Rav Yosef said back, but ihachi ibcha mi boile lemisni, yerek shel Truma, b'shemen shel shvias. So Rav Yosef says, but then if that were the point, the emphasis should have been on the fact that the Truma is vegetables, and the Shemitah is the oil. But the Mishnah lists it just the opposite, that the Shemitah is the vegetable, and the Truma is the oil. So we're talking about Truma mid'oraisa, not Truma mid'orabanan. So that's why you should have asked them from there. V'lav miosvisei mi masnisen demater Reb Shimon v'amar li di'i arev, hachanami di'i arev. But one second, Rebbe, but I asked from our own Mishnah. And Rava had said that our Mishnah is talking about a case where the two animals got mixed together. Only b'di'evet does Reb Shimon hold that mevi and kodshim lebeis apsul, because the asham animal and the shlomim animal got mixed together. So maybe that's what he'll tell me by the case of Shemitah, where it already got the vegetable and the oil mixed together, so then Reb Shimon says you're allowed to cook it. But maybe lechatchila, to mix them, he wouldn't permit. But idi arev maitamayo derabanan. Well then how would you explain the chachamim? Why would the chachamim say that you're not that if it's already mixed, you're not allowed to cook it? If it's already mixed, then it's b'di'evid. What else are you supposed to do with it? So the Gemara says, mi didahava asham ushlamim. Well, it's the same chachamim of our Mishnah who say that even though you don't know which animal is the shlamim and which is the asham, you still can't be mevi kodshim lebeis apsul. So maybe that's the same case by Shemitah. But wait a minute, midami, but that's not a good comparison. Hasam isle takanta b're'iyah, has lesle takanta b're'iyah. So it argues Rav Yosef that in the case of our Mishnah, there is a remedy without being mevi kodshim lebeis apsul. You could just let the animals develop a mum and then be po to them and start all over again. But over here, how can you separate vegetables and oil once they've already been mixed together? Halodami ela lechaticha shebechatichas tekivin deles takanta te'achal kechamer shebahen. And so therefore Rav Yosef's argument is that if you're going to tell me that the Mishnah in Shvius is talking about where the vegetables and the oil already were mixed together, then why in the world would the Chachamim say that you're not allowed to cook it? There's no remedy in that situation. It would be no different that if you had a piece of sacrificial meat after the korban was already brought from an asham, it got mixed up with a piece of meat from a shlamim, there the Chachamim are going to say you can't be poted that at that point. So of course there's no other solution, and you'd have to just treat it with the chumras of both, and not eat it past the nighttime. So wait a minute. Maskef lo ravina midami chaticha shebechatichos les la takanta klal hayisle takanta bischita. But Ravina says, but 1 second. If a piece of meat from an asham gets mixed up with a piece of meat from a shlamim, I can understand in that case the chachamim would have to relent because there's no other remedy. And therefore they would say that, you have to treat both of them as an asham and not eat it past the nighttime. But over here there is a remedy. I don't know what you're saying, Rav Yosef, there's no remedy. Of course there's a remedy. You can separate the vegetables from the oil before cooking them by just pulling out the vegetables from the oil and squeezing them such that the oil is completely removed from the vegetables. And that way you'll prevent being mevi kodshim lebeis apsul. So for Rav Yosef, hechi nischa, but Rav Yosef says that's not possible, that's not practical. You know why? Because what do you mean you're going to squeeze the vegetables and get out all of the oil? Nischa tuva kamafsid b'shvius, nischa portasov sofia ruve mi arev. If you're going to totally squeeze the vegetables, let's say you're dealing with onions or carrots or something, or beets or something like that. If you're going to squeeze them so much to get out every single drop of oil, you'll have to mash them to the point of destroying it. And that's not permitted. You're not allowed to be mafsid. You're not allowed to actively destroy shemitah produce. And what's the alternative? To squeeze it minimally so that you get off as much oil as possible, but there'll always be some oil remaining from truma. And therefore, says Rav Yosef, there's no other solution. Once the oil and the vegetables have been mixed together, they're not separable anymore. And once they're not separable, there's no remedy. So the Mishnah can't be talking about such a case, because if so, then even the Chachamim would relent that you're allowed to cook it, because there's no other option. So therefore, says Rav Yosef, you could have used this Mishnah once again as a challenge, because it's saying that even before the vegetables get mixed, according to Reb Shimon, it's mutter. So you see that even lechatchila, he holds that mevi'in kodshim lebeis apsul. Now, Esvei. All right, fine. Let's ask another kasha, where we're going to prove that Reb Shimon holds even lechatchila mevi'in kodshim lebeis apsul. Reb Shimon omer lemocharas mevi ashamo velugo imo, va'omer imshal mitzora hareze ashamo v'zelugo, v'im lav asham zeh shel shalmi nadava, va'oso asham ton shchita b'tzafon, umatan bahonos usmicha unesachim, utenufas chazei v'shok, v'necha liyom v'layla. Period. Here's another Mishnah. This Mishnah appears in Maseches, well, it's a Tosefta. It's a Tosefta, so it's a Bryce in Maseches Nazir. And it talks about the laws of a Mitzorah. Now we know that when a person is a Mitzorah Muchlat, he's a definitive Mitzorah, he, in order to be allowed back in the Israelite camp and to get full purification, he has to bring a series of karbanos. He has to have oil from a log of shemen placed on his earlobe, on his big thumb, on his thumb and his big toe. And before then, the oil has to be sprinkled 7 times towards the paroches. Okay? And then after you put the oil on his body, you put the blood of the sacrifice on his body, etc. Now, what happens if a person is a safek mitzorah muchlat? Which means that we have some kind of safek has arisen, that either he was definitively a Mitzorah or he was not definitively a Mitzorah. If he was not definitively a Mitzorah, then he doesn't have to bring a set of karbanos. So we have a suffix here whether he's a muchlat or a non-muchlat. So what he has to do is, the only remedy is, he's got to bring an animal, bring a sheep, and basically declare as follows. If I'm chayiv to bring this sheep as an asham, I hereby make this into my asham, and he brings together with it a log of shemen. And if this is not an asham, then I want it to be just a regular shlamim karban. And we basically place the chumras of both an asham and a shlamim on this animal. So therefore, it needs to be slaughtered in the north like an asham. It needs to have the blood of it placed on his body. It needs to have smicha like a korban shlamim. It needs to have nesachim like a korban shlamim, which is additional libations of oil and so forth, and flour and wine. And it needs tenufas chazeh v'shok, and you need to wave the korban like you do with any korban shlamim in all 6 directions. And it has the chumrah of an asham that it can only be eaten in the nighttime. Now this is all according to Reb Shimon, and Reb Shimon says, lechatchila, you do this, even though you're being mevi kodshim lebeis hapsul, lechatchila, because you're causing an expiration date for this possible shlamim to be before it's normally would expire. So once again, we have proof that Reb Shimon is mekel lechatchila. So the Gemara answers not necessarily because tikkunei gavra shiny. Maybe when it comes to purifying an individual and allowing him back into the camp, because there's no other option, Reb Shimon is mekel. But it could be that lechatchila, let's say, when there's no compelling reason of allowing a person to come back into the camp, Reb Shimon would not be mekel. So
he would stay as a safek mitzvah?
He would remain as a safek mitzvah without going through the karbanos process.
For the
rest of his life, and that's why we're mekel, and we allow him to do this. So the Gemara now says, Hatenach Asham Log Ma'ikal Amemer. So the Gemara says, okay, so you've explained this Mishnah according to Reb Shimon, at least Rav's interpretation of Reb Shimon. But I have a side question. Let's go back to that brisa for a second and sort of analyze how this is going to work logistically. You talked about how you can make the animal a safek asham, a safek shlamim, and you can make a tanai so that either way you give it the chumras of both an asham and a shlamim. But what about that container of oil, that log of oil? What are you going to do with that? I understand if he's chayiv because it's an asham, you're bringing a log of shemen. But what if it's a shlamim? What is this log of shemen doing? You don't bring a log of shemen with a shlamim. So the Amar log ze yehi nedava. So the Gemara says, you know what? You say, if this animal is a shlamim, then I'm offering a separate nedava of oil, that you have a right to offer an oil offering, just like you have the right to offer a voluntary meal offering. You can bring a container of flour and donate it to the temple on a sacrificial basis. You can do the same thing with oil. The dil malav mitzaru boy mekametz. But 1 second, then you're going to have to do kemitza, because just like when you donate flour as a voluntary offering, as an adava, you do kemitza. You take the komets and you put it on a fistful of flour, you put it on the fire, and then the remainder is called shirayim, and it's eaten by the kohanim. Oil is the same. The kohen would take a fistful of oil, toss it onto the mizbeach to burn it, and the rest of it would be eaten by the kohanim. So the Gemara says, Taka, that's what you do, dimikametz. But wait a minute, v'dilma mitzora hu boi matan sheva. But 1 second, what if the guy's a mitzora, in which case you need to sprinkle the oil towards the parochas and then place it on his body? And now you've already done kemitza. So the Gemara says, diyohiv. So you'll do that as well. But wait a minute, v'hachasar lei. But 1 second, if you've already done the kemitza, you no longer have a full log of shemen. You have a log minus a fistful of oil. So the Gemara says, demaisi purta umamalei. Not a problem. You top it off. In other words, the kohen will take a fistful of oil, and then to augment the missing fistful of oil, you'll add a little bit more oil afterwards. And then the kohen will do the sprinkling of the oil for the mitzorah. Ditnan chaser halog ad shelo yatzak yimla'enu. Because we have a general rule that if the log of oil that a mitzorah wants to bring, the Mishnah says that if some of it spills out before he has a chance to do the sprinkling, just top it off, it's no problem. But wait a minute, v'haboi haktara. But 1 second, but the oil that the kohen has taken a fistful because maybe it's a gift offering, has to be placed on the mizbeach and burnt on the fire. So the Gemara says, what's the problem? Da'akter. So the Gemara says, okay, fine. So he puts it on the fire. But Amos, but when does he do that? 1 second. If he puts the fistful of oil, because maybe it's an adava, maybe it's a gift offering, if he does it after the kohen has done the sprinkling of the oil has now created a deficiency in the oil that the person originally brought as his gift offering. And we have a general rule that if, let's say we're talking about flour, after I've taken the fistful of flour, before I've put it on the fire, if some of the shirayim spills out, then I'm not allowed to put the komets on the fire anymore. I'm not allowed to burn the komets. So if I take the fistful of oil as my kemitza, and then the kohen does the sprinkling for the mitzorah, I've created a deficiency in the shirayim, and I'm not allowed to put the oil on the fire. So fine, so you'll tell me, you know what, put the fistful of oil on the fire before you sprinkle for the mitzorah. Ikodamat no sheva, kol shemimenu leishim harehu beval taktiru. But 1 second, there's a problem now. He says, because after I place the komets on the fire, the status of the shirayim is, according to the Torah, I'm not allowed to use it for any sacrificial purpose. It's only meant for the kohanim. Shirayim that I try to use now sacrificially for any other kind of avoda in the temple is pasul. So if I've taken my fistful of oil, because it may be a nedava, and I burn it on the fire, on the mizbeach, I'm not allowed to take any additional oil from the remnant and use it to sprinkle as an avoda, because it's now pasul to do avoda with. So I'm stuck. I've got to do the kemitza, I've got to do the sprinkling, but mechanically, how does it work? It seems like you're stuck no matter how you look at it. So Amar of Yehuda Bereder Reb Shimon ben Pazi, Damasik luhu l'shem eitzim. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer l'reach nichochi atamale, aval atamale l'shem eitzim. So the answer is as follows. The only time that rule applies, that when I take a kometz and I place it on the fire, that all of the shiraim now becomes sacrificially prohibited. I can only use it for the kohan. I can only give it to the kohanim, but I can't use it for any sacrificial purpose, is only when the kometz was burned for a korban, to create reach nichoach, to create a savory fragrance before the Lord. But let's say I have the following in mind. I make the following tanai in my head. I'm taking the fistful of oil and I'm going to burn it on the fire. If this is truly a nedava, so then I want this burning to be a sacrificial burning to create a reach nichoach for Hashem. But if this is not a nedava, but rather it's the log of shemen for a mitzorah, then this fistful of oil that I'm taking is only going to be placed on the fire for the purposes of what? Of adding fuel to the fire to build the fire. And as long as it's not being used for reach nichoach to create a fragrance for the Lord, then the shirayim of that oil, the leftover of the oil, can be used for sacrificial purposes afterwards. And so therefore, mimon afshach. If it's a nedava, so then I don't need to do sprinkling for the kohen, and therefore I can burn it. If it's not a nedava, but rather a mitzorah oil, so then my burning on the mizbeach is not for reach nichoach, but rather to add fuel to the fire, and therefore I have no prohibition of using the oil for other sacrificial purposes, such as sprinkling for a mitzorah. So the Gemara now says, "V'ha'ika shirayim deboim alinu, v'ika hachporta delo kamet ziluya." But the Gemara says, but wait a minute, you have another problem. How are the kohanim going to be allowed to have the remnant of this oil if you topped it off? Remember, what did we tell you to do? You take the kemitza of oil, then you're going to put it on the fire, and then you're going to be sprinkling, and then we said, then what do? You top it off. You top off the oil. That additional oil that you topped off did not have kemitza done for it. It's sanctified, did not have kemitza, so how can the kohanim consume that oil? It doesn't have the din of shirayim. So the Gemara answers, deparikle. So the answer is, says the Gemara, here's what you'll do. You'll make the following declaration. I'm topping off the oil because I need a log of shemen in the event that this is a mitzorah oil container. But in the event that it's a shlomim, there's no reason for me to top it off. And this topped off oil lacks kemitza. So I hereby declare that in the event that it's a shlomim, I hereby redeem the kedusha of this oil onto coinage, and therefore it has the status of chulin. So this is at best, or at worst, it's shirayim oil mixed together with chulin oil, and therefore the kohanim can consume it. But 1 second, deparak lehecha. But where did you do that redemption? I gavoy kama'ayil chulin la'azara, I avroi ifsule biyotze. The Gemara says, but wait a minute, you still are faced with a dilemma. Because we know that you're not allowed to bring chulin inside the temple courtyard. So by declaring this chulin, by passing its kedusha onto coinage, aren't you in violation of the law that you can't bring chulin into the temple? And if you take the container of oil and do this redemption outside, you've now pasuled the oil because it's not allowed to leave the temple environs. Right? What? Catch 22. So the Gemara says, La'olam gavoy v'chulin memei lahavya. So the Gemara answers, you do the redemption while the oil is still inside the temple courtyard. And the reason why it's not a problem is because there's only a prohibition of proactively bringing chulin from outside the temple into the temple. But if when the oil was brought into the temple, it was kodesh, it was sanctified, and then I cause it to become chulin through a redemption process, I'm not proactively bringing chulin into the courtyard. It's happening on its own, and therefore I'm not in violation. One more question. V'ha'amar Reb Shimon ein misnadvin shemen. But one second, isn't Reb Shimon the one who holds, the one that we're now talking about, doesn't Reb Shimon hold that giving a voluntary gift of oil is not something that we allow? We allow you to bring voluntary flour, but we don't allow you to bring voluntary oil. That's only according to other Tanoim, but not according to Reb Shimon. So how does this whole process work? So the Gemara answers, Tikune Gavra Shaini. Final answer is that even though Reb Shimon normally prohibits you from bringing oil as a voluntary gift offering, but here, since there's no other option, in order to fix this fellow, to allow him to be back into the camp, Reb Shimon would allow a voluntary gift offering. So we'll just go to the Mishnah, and it's very simple. Yasiv Rabbi Chumi kamei de Ravina v'Yasiv v'kamer mishmei de Ravuna bar Tachlifa v'neima asham ze yehi asham talui shma mina mantana de pola galei de Rebbe Eliezer Reb Shimon hu damer ein misnad v'in asham talui. So Rav Rechume has a very interesting fundamental point. He says, what was the Bryce's advocacy? It said that what you should do is make the following tonight. If I'm a mitzorah and I have to bring a korban, so this should be an asham. And if I'm not a mitzorah, I want the sheep to be what? To be a shlamim. He says, Rav Rechume says, why do you have to do that? Why can't you say that either way it'll be an asham? If I'm chayv in asham as a mitzorah, it's an asham. And if I'm chayiv in asham, if I'm not chayiv in asham as a mitzorah, Rabbi Eliezer paskins, you're allowed to bring a voluntary asham talui at any time in your life. Why? Because Rabbi Eliezer says, who knows if I've sinned or not? Normally we hold that in asham talui you only bring when you know you've done something and you don't know whether it's a violation. Let's say I had a piece of fat in front of me, and I ate it, and now I don't know whether it was shuman or chalif. But Rabbi Eliezer says, no, any day that goes by, who knows who you insulted, who you hurt, who you stepped on, and something you may have done. You may have put something in your mouth and it wasn't really kosher. You may have eaten a bug. Who knows what you did? And therefore Rabbi Eliezer says you can bring an asham talui every day, just in case. So the fact that the Mishnah, and this would, by the way, this would solve the problem of Vein Mevin Kadshim Lebeis Absul, because both an Asham Mitzorah and an Asham Toli both have the same expiration date of the day and the night, not the following day. So why don't we say that? Must be that Reb Shimon disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer. Now we know the name of the person who argues with Rabbi Eliezer and says you don't have the option of just willy-nilly bringing an Asham Toli whenever you like. So the Gemara says no. So Ravina hears this argument and he says, Amar lei, Torah, Imri bedichri michlefilach. He said to Rav Rechume, he says, Torah, oh my dear Talmud Chacham, you're so scholarly, but you forgot some basic Torah information. He says, the reason why you can't do that is not because Reb Shimon holds you can't bring a voluntary Asham Talui, but rather for a much more fundamental issue. An Asham for a Mitzorah has to be under a year old, and an Asham Talui is over a year old and under 2 years old. They're two different animals. That's the reason why you can't make the condition. So, but an Asham and a Shlamim, you could, because they can both be under a year old. And that's the reason why it's not going to work. Have a great day.